Great. People are joining. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes up until everyone can join. Okay, so then let's start. Dear everybody, on behalf of the entire Dun & Bradstreet Europe team and our GTM lead in third-party risk and compliance, Christian Kellner, I would like to warmly welcome you to our second day of the 2021 version of the Compliance Knowledge Power Days. The Power Days span an entire week and focus on important topics of compliance. You would gain insights into why we at Dun & Bradstreet believe that master data compliance is a true love story, how you can streamline your compliance processes with the right tools, and how you can ensure to stay updated about your ultimate beneficial owners. Tomorrow, we'll elaborate on and look into the Supply Chain Act and ESG and learn how our precious customer Raiffeisen Factor Bank runs their KYC processes. We do this over lunch as part of our lunch connection, where you can grab a free voucher and enjoy a delicious meal while learning. On Thursday and Friday, our experts will shed practical light on existing and upcoming regulatory requirements, as well as outline a sound and automated third-party risk management approach. So if you haven't registered yet, don't hesitate to join the virtual sessions. You won't regret it for sure. However, in a highly regulated and compliant world, people try to stretch boundaries. Sometimes people go even further and embark on a non-compliant journey, but it is not the regulations nor the laws that stop them. It's brave and selfless people uncovering and revealing non-compliant activities. And sometimes that has a detrimental effect on their own lives. In fact, sometimes they even risk their own lives or their families' lives. Today, I'm extremely honored to introduce a person who is one of those brave and selfless individuals who truly wrote history, Pav Gill. He is the whistleblower in the biggest fraud case in Germany to date and was a turning point in the breakdown of Wirecard. A very warm welcome to you, Pav. We are extremely glad to have you.
Thanks, Patrick. Good to be here.
Great. Okay, so before Pav captivates us with his exciting story, I would like to point out a few logistical things. We're going to record the session for those who cannot participate and would share the recordings with you after the sessions as well. We have put you on mute. If you have any questions during the session or when we come to the question and answers part, then please write them into the FNQs. There is a F&A button within your Zoom window at the bottom. We'll take care about the questions and raise them on your behalf. The chat has been disabled due to privacy. Okay, so let's jump into it. Pav, Wirecard's breakdown is certainly the biggest fraud scandal that Germany has ever seen. Can you please bring our audience up to speed? What happened when you joined Wirecard in 2017 and about your role?
Sure. So a lot of things happened during that 1 year that I was at Wirecard. My role was to be the first legal person on the ground in the Asia region. So I was covering 11 markets in the Asia Pacific region, which Wirecard was operating in at that time. And I was given the instructions to be the eyes and ears on the ground for particularly the Munich HQ legal team as well. So, during the course of the 1 year there, significant events took place, which, involved, for example, things that didn't make sense, internal whistleblowers coming to me as sole legal counsel in the region and saying that, look, they're being forced to carry out transactions which are illegal or which they feel would jeopardize them as well as their safety. So, I did take these people into confidence and eventually launched an internal investigation into what was going on. And that was shut down as soon as the board found out. And, I was the last man standing, forced out of the company. And after that, yeah, we know what happened, I guess.
Okay, I mean, I guess we are all aware about the story, and I guess that was not even exciting times, I would say. I mean, that was really also kind of a life-threatening situation. But I mean, let's jump back to the startings when you started off at Wirecard and people approach you about the irregularities. I mean, what were your initial thoughts when you kind of uncovered that something is going on here?
Well, very early on upon joining the company, things just didn't make sense to me anyway. A lot of things didn't add up. For example, you had the CFO type figure called Ido, who was way inexperienced based on his CV, but yet he was controlling finances all the way from South America to New Zealand, practically the whole globe. And he was directly reporting to the board itself. And no one actually wanted to cross this guy. So, a simple thing like getting wages for every employee in the Asia Pacific region, Ido was the one that had to go to Munich to, get that money, which was very surprising for a company that was going to be DAX listed and then became DAX listed on the German stock exchange. Because we are talking about a company which is valued more than Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank combined, and yet they're having difficulties paying wages of employees in each of the subsidiaries. And on top of that, if you looked at the financial statements of each of the subsidiaries in Asia Pacific, you would see that none of them were actually profit making. A lot of them were actually loss making. So when financials like quarterly financials or interim financial results came out, and these figures were nearly the same in terms of EBITDA profits and to the Europe region, none actually could understand why and where this money was coming from. So obviously, as a legal and compliance person, these things just didn't make sense. And suspicions were raised from my end and another colleague of mine. And that, we got the confidence of some of the finance staff in the company who were operating under this Ido person. And eventually I convinced one of them to tell me what was going on, and that triggered off a whole series of events. Okay.
So apparently Ido played kind of a pivotal role in the entire scandal. And from my research, I've heard that a lot of people were kind of afraid of Ido. Could you point out why that was the case?
Well, he was a powerful person because he was hired by at that time the CFO Wirecard. And also he had the year of Jan Marsalek, who now is one of the most wanted men in Europe and on the run, the COO at the time of Wirecard. And a lot of the fellow I mean, the executive vice presidents in the region, none of them wanted to cross Ito because they all used to say that he's a very powerful person, and if we offend him, um, our budgets would be taking a hit. So it's best to keep this guy on our positive side. And what was also strange from a corporate governance perspective is all the EVPs, along with the CEO type figures, they all reported to Jan Marsalek. So what was strange is if you looked at Ito's CV and his background, at the time he was about in his early 30s, maybe 30 to 32 years old. And none of the experience levels actually added up to what Wirecard was giving him in terms of responsibility. You would expect, like as a German listed company, as a very multi-billion-dollar market cap enterprise, that you would hire someone who's more experienced and has that kind of know-how. I mean, we're talking about a person who couldn't even put an email meaningfully together when he wrote it. So the question was raised, like, what was it that the board members saw in Ito that made them trust him so much in order to pretty much run finances from right across the map?
Okay, so it looks like that apart from that, he played a huge role in the entire scandal. You are pointing out that his qualification would not have matched up to the role that he should have played. Do you believe that when he was hired, he was already hired in hindsight that, you know, he should coordinate, manage a couple of things that might not be from a compliance perspective okay-ish?
I mean, the way he ran the finance department was also questionable in the first place. So what he had a strategy, which is he would hire a lot of inexperienced staff, and then he would suddenly promote them. And if you're talking about Singapore, which was the APAC HQ, where Ito was, subsequently transferred to, what Ito would do would be hire Malaysian and Indonesian staff, so give them an employment pass in Singapore, and then he would give them a high salary and promote them to levels like head of accounting or head of this and head of that, which they were actually not experienced to carry out. So what that meant is they had to rely on his expertise and his instructions, because if you were one of these employees, the way you are looking at your scenario is as follows. I've now got an employment pass in Singapore. I've got a good job with a German listed company. On top of that, I've got a good title. So if I'm inexperienced, I'll rely on my boss, and I don't want to, offend anybody, because where else would I get this opportunity? So to me, that was a form of abuse in a way, because he was actually hiring and promoting people who were inexperienced and who relied fully on to carry these dubious practices which the finance department was doing.
Okay. So when you started your research, you also got, I guess, in touch and stumbled upon Ito. How was that for you? What kind of relationship did you have to Ito?
I had a very good relationship with him. I mean, he was one of the first few people that I was told to get close to, simply because he was that influential in the company. So we became very amiable. We had several business trips together in the region. We went to different subsidiaries. He actually kind of gained my trust as well in a way. Like, he didn't think that I was one of those people that would turn against him or was suspicious of him, because genuinely at the time I was actually trying to figure out what the dynamic was and what was actually going on in the region. Because if you were in Wirecard at that time as a new employee, what was being drilled into your head was that Wirecard is practically a startup in APAC. It just expanded so quickly. There are integration issues. In every country in Southeast Asia, for example, it's so different to one another. And yet you have them trying to sync with a very German, European style organization. So these things take time, sometimes years, and there are teething problems. So this is what was drilled into your head. And for me, it was really trying to understand, like, was that the case or was something more going on?
When talking about, is there more going on? When you started looking into it and start realizing that it could be something bigger, what kind of moment was that for you? When did you realize it, and what did it do with you?
Well, that's when the senior finance person, one of them that he hired, came to me and told me that she's afraid of her life because she was hired by Ido and his number two, who's also Indonesian, like Ido, and the kind of things that she's being made to do in terms of a finance role was clearly not right. But yet, she didn't know how to proceed because you can't exactly tell your boss that you don't want to do this without offend. I mean, people are still kind of sensitive to offending, commands from superiors in this part of the world, at least. Sometimes you may question yourself. And I think this is one of the big problems with whistleblowing in general. I think a lot of employees do not necessarily know. They may suspect that they're being told that what they're doing is wrong, but yet they would constantly convince themselves that they're either overthinking it, or they shouldn't rock the boat, or they shouldn't jeopardize what is the status quo, right? But some of the events which this employee was being told to do were just flat out wrong, like round tripping, for example. And that person didn't know who to speak to other than me, because HR, human resource department, was also very questionable. Everybody knew that the HR department was actually the spy of the management, if you can put it that way. So because this person joined about the same time as I did, I think she found that there could be a trust and confidence placed in me, and I wouldn't necessarily throw her under the bus. So a lot of the stuff that she actually gave to me on paper in terms of hard evidence, that was just clear. Like one of the invoices, for example, was a 2 million euro payment in Malaysia for a market intelligence report in Malaysia. And this is by a company which has no business really. It's just a shell company. And the way the payments are structured, the invoice looked exactly like Wirecard's invoice format. And they were split into 4 payments of 500,000 euros. And one of the most basic things that anyone in this part of the world knows is that in Malaysia, you do not invoice in euros. And also, I think it would be quite something for anyone to see what a 2 million euro market intelligence report looks like from an unknown company. So we're talking about these kinds of very obvious, questionable activities.
Was it the first time for you, Pav, when the person approached you and just told you that she's afraid of that something's going to happen to her? Was that the first time that someone in your professional career approached you when you kind of felt that maybe this turns out into something like whistleblowing? And how was that for you? How did you cope with it? I mean, if it was the first time, that was something new for you as well.
I think it's the first time that someone has actually come with hard evidence and genuine fears, which couldn't be ignored, and which also tallied with my own suspicions. So there have been obviously many, I mean, no company is 100% clean, right? And we always have things which are gray, especially in the fintech space, where, like for me now, I'm in the crypto space. So every day you have something which may not have a clear regulation or guideline on. But I think in this particular situation, it was very, very obvious that what the company or what Ido was doing at that time was just flat out illegal or just wrong. And what is very scary as well when you're talking about this guy is that he used to go around telling everyone that he's married to a drug dealing family in Jakarta. So naturally, as a legal and compliance lead, if you're talking about a payments company and a person who's involved potentially indirectly, maybe in a drug scenario, but yet is covering South America to New Zealand in terms of finances and controlling everything, then these are very questionable red flags. Like, what kind of basic due diligence checks has the company done? why were they approved and what's going on, right? So there's just so many questions in your head. And when an employee comes to you with evidence that's pretty much irrefutable, on at least at that moment, um, you need to do something about it, which is you need to investigate further.
So you did that basically. So you were investigating even further, and then the board found also out that you're doing this and something is not adding up. How did the board react on that?
Well, the board was very upset. So from what I heard from the general counsel, who got involved very late in the stage, general counsel Andrea Gores. So I didn't know that she wasn't aware or made aware of this investigation that was taking place, simply because it was being coordinated by her number two, which is the deputy general counsel. So I was reporting to him, taking instructions from him. We were engaging the law firm in Singapore to look at mirrored inboxes of Ido and his two senior finance members, one of whom was the head of finance for the Asia Pacific region. So we looked at their inboxes. We found like just so many things, which, for example, you had his number two just emailing himself logos of a lot of these companies, which we had no legitimate business dealings with, and no reason to have any dealings with, right? So any normal company would immediately, having seen these things, at least suspend these employees pending further investigation outcomes. But none of these things happened. In fact, the board was very upset. You had Jan Marsalek, who was very angry, saying Asia is his baby and his region. How come he was never made aware? You had Marcus Braun, who as of today is still feigning complete ignorance and portraying himself as a victim, as a CEO, saying that, you know, this thing is wasting his time because it's only 25 million euros and 30 million euros. And then you had the other two board members who just were ambivalent to the whole thing. So what they then decided to do, at least Jan Marsalek and Marcus Braun decided to do, was to shut down the investigation. But then again, you know, they couldn't really shut it down instantly. So what was very creative on their part was to say, look, let this law firm just continue, and let's use this as a gap analysis, which basically means let's find out where our gaps are if someone looks at our company and then try to cement them, right? And one of the questions I see in the chat is, was a whistleblowing channel created? Yes, and this was part of the next steps which the company did, which is extremely frightening, is they actually rolled out a whistleblowing program, which was said to be anonymous, but in effect, it actually went straight to Jan Marsalek and the board. So they used the whistleblowing channel internally as a way to find out like who else knew what, and they could then find a way to deal with people.
Okay, so that must be a strange that you went through also, and the employees for sure as well. So when the board found out, and they freaked kind of out, they wanted to stop the investigations, or, you know, as you pointed it out, they did it in a different way, communicated that in a different way. But what did it do to you? Did they change their behavior, the company, the management, everyone who was aware of the investigations? Did they change their behavior towards you?
Oh yeah, for sure, like very quickly. So the same bosses in Munich who were extremely gung-ho and wanting to do the right thing suddenly started to backtrack and slink away. And in the local office in Singapore where I was based, you had the local CEO type figure that constantly coming into the office and intimidating, you know, closing the door, raising his voice. There were also some kind of like fake HR investigations which were undertaken against me, just to add on to the pressure, for example. So you feel like you're in a very isolated situation. But what was keeping me going was that the law firm continued to say that this is just a race against time now. And the more we are uncovering as a law firm would be just so clear cut that these people just have to go. So just hang in there. and just withstand these firestorms that are going on, right? So that's why I was just staying put. And at the same time, it's very difficult because you have 11 markets to cover. So you still need to put all these pressures aside and focus on your work, because what you don't want to do is then give someone a reason that you're not performing, or an objective work related reason to get rid of you.
And how was that for you? I could imagine that performing under such a pressure, people are not nice to you. How was that for you personally, Pav?
Well, I think it wasn't a good situation, but I'm one of those. I guess it's like, one of those stubborn people uh, who knows, like, he's a dog with a bone, right? So once you know that you're on the right track, or then it becomes a challenge, because this is what you were hired to do. This is the whole point of being a legal and compliance professional, right? Why should you be resigning, or why should you be cowing to any kind of these intimidatory or just plain nonsense behavior from the company? Of course, it's difficult. It's easier said than done, but at the end of the day, the focus is really on wanting to do your job. So it was just trying to constantly get busy with the work. It was extremely challenging. One of the key things which I think many people don't realize is that when you're in this situation, you feel extremely isolated, because you can't speak about it to anyone. You can't talk to your friends about it. You can't even talk to your colleagues about it, simply because you have confidentiality and other professional obligations involved, right? So, that's where the isolation kicks in. And of course, you also second guess yourself, like, why are you in this situation for having tried to do the right thing? Is this actually the right thing? Should you just cave and let everyone know you're just not interested anymore? So you flip through a whole spectrum of emotions, but I think what keeps you grounded is that moral compass and that ethical compass, plus the professional one, which is you need to do your job at the end of the day. And as long as you're doing it, and if you're going to be then fired for doing it, then so be it.
So, and then you had to leave the company. Were you kind of surprised how they managed you out of the company?
Yeah, so that was when I think all rules of engagement, if you want to put it that way, in this scenario were out of the window, because having failed in all various tactics and strategies which they were coming up with in order to get me to leave the company, they decided to take the extreme route, which is to create a business trip to Jakarta, which didn't exist in a bona fide way. They kept insisting that I go there to attend a meeting, which didn't make any sense. And they also said that even if I go in 2 weeks' time, in 2 days' time, or in 2 months' time, that's okay, as long as I decide that I will go. And when someone says these kind of weird stuff, you naturally have your red flags everywhere in your head. My mom found out, and she was like, "These, Jakarta, where Ido is from, and they are forcing you to go there with no legitimate business reason, then this, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to keep your passport," right? What was the most concerning aspect of it was that I received 2 phone calls from Munich, and I still don't know like who these people are, saying that, "Look, I understand you're being told to go on this business trip to Jakarta. We would strongly advise that you don't do it, because you won't come back." The minute going, and that was on a Thursday, I remember. On a Friday, I received an email from the local CEO guy on the ground there. And he said, "Look, I want to see you in my office on Tuesday." And I already knew that that's it. They are going to use this as a reason to terminate or force me out of the company. And again, this is one of the very weird situations that a person is in, right? Because if a company is using a business trip to get rid of you, and you know that, but you don't want to go on the business trip because of that, then technically they could just turn around and say that you're not doing your job, right? You're refusing to be a professional, you're not carrying out instructions. So they will use this to get rid of you. And that's actually what happened on that Tuesday. tried to make use of this situation. The CEO guy on that Tuesday said, look, been trying to get you to play ball for all these months. You refused to. You thought you could run to your legal team in Munich, but everything, they listen to everything I say and blah, blah, blah. So we want you to go.
Okay. Wouldn't have it been easier for Wirecard, kind of bribe you, or, rather than threatening your life?
Yeah, that's what I still kind of don't understand. I mean, there were indirect attempts at doing that, like saying, look, what would it take for you to just forget about it? What it's one, I mean, I couldn't put myself in that position, obviously, because once you do that, then there's no turning back from it. It's a paper trail, as attractive as it might be. But they didn't emphasize on that for very long. They were trying more aggressive ways. And once I decided that I was going to leave the company, that's where it made even less sense, because the agreement was that they would be supportive in me finding another job. In fact, they weren't. They reneged on that agreement, and they went out of their way, even after I left the company, to make sure that I didn't find gainful employment, or that I was constantly being discredited in the market. So I think that is the part which I didn't understand, because if someone's left the company, then you should just let them go and let them move on. But Wirecard didn't. They kept keeping tabs. And it's not, if anyone watched the Sky documentary, it's not just on me, it's also on a few others. Anyone that's viewed in that's termed in their mindset as a troublemaker, they would not let that person carry on. They would not let the person move on. So in a weird way, as I've said in quite a few talks now, it's really like dealing with bullies, right? Like criminal organizations, and I guess criminals in general, they're all like bullies in the sense that they'll keep trying to carry out their misdeeds until one day they meet like the wrong counterparty that just brings it all to an end. And I think in Wirecard's case, that's what's happened.
Okay. So in my introduction, I pointed out that it's very often the brave and the selfless people who do uncover these kind of things. But it was not just you. Also, your mother played a huge role in the entire breakdown of Wirecard. Can you point out what your mother did?
Oh yeah, my mom. I mean, just some background. My mom's a single parent, and I'm the only child from the get-go. So naturally, she's been overly protective, and I think until now she still is. It gives me a few headaches every now and then, as a 38-year-old guy with white hair. So, my mom was very taken aback by the whole Jakarta attempt, and even as a sole breadwinner of the family, she found very, even they tried to get rid of it, didn't work, and now they're job, right? And so I think at some point it just hit her internally, and she decided that, okay, if this is how it's going to be, then something needs to be done about it. And I have no idea how from her sofa she got in touch with Claire Newcastle Brown, who's Gordon Brown's sister-in-law, and also the journalist that exposed 1MDB in Malaysia, the biggest scandal there. She got in touch with Claire Brown. Claire gave her some advice, saying that the story is very big, and she knows that the Financial Times has been covering this for the last 5 years, and they would be best placed to deal with this. So my mom just came to me while I was looking for a job every day, saying, look, I've got an appointment made with the FT. Let's speak to them. And to me, it was more like, what have you done? Why? What's the point of it? But the way she phrased it was more like, look, let's just speak to the FT. They're not a scoop paper. They're a very professional outfit. Let's just see. Maybe we don't give them everything first, but let's just understand how certain outfits like that would protect their sources, would protect whistleblowers, and whether there's anything to this whole thing, right? Because both of us could just be overthinking it. Because the FT could just turn around and say, look, based on everything it's shown us and given us, like, I think this is just overblown, like, forget about it. So that's what actually kickstarted that meeting with the FT.
So when you spoke then to the FTE right after that, nothing happened.
Well, the first meeting was with Stefania Palma, the Singapore correspondent. So Dan McCrum actually asked her to meet us in the airport and just to see like what information was present and what this whole thing was about. Because I think Dan at the time was also pretty uh, sensitive about the whole Wirecard thing because he was writing Alphaville for a few years and getting completely destroyed on Twitter by the Wirecard armies there. So he was just quite apprehensive whether this is just another trap. But when Stefania saw like the material that was there, I think it was so irrefutable that within 3 days from that meeting, Dan was in Singapore, and we had another 3 days going through the material. The problem was, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but the difficulty was like it took 4 months for the FT to finally publish their first article. And that only happened when we kind of like threatened them. Claire Recastle actually threatened the FT saying, look, there's been 4 months, you guys are sitting on it. Every time you say you're going to publish it, you change your mind. There's so many false deadlines. So if you're not going to publish it, then we will just move to a paper that will. And that triggered the first article to be released on January 30th, I think, or 31st, 2019. Or was it 2020? Last year, yeah, 2020.
So when that article came out, how did you feel?
It was great because finally the things are out in the open. The company would now be distracted with having to deal with a legitimate expose. This time, and for the first time, with hard evidence from someone from within. I mean, you're talking about myriad inboxes of Edo and these people. There's just no way, like that's raw data, right? You can't fudge that. I mean, even if you forensically analyze that inbox, you would see it's not been tampered with. But I think Wirecard had some suspicions over the recent years that kind of thing could potentially happen, which is why the company also told all employees to just move to Telegram as a way of communications.
Yeah, so I guess things just accelerated then, and you were having good feelings that finally the truth is kind of out. Did you hear anything back then from Wirecard after everything was out?
Yeah, so there were employees and you know, I wouldn't describe who they are, but people that I thought were trying to do the right thing with me at some point. You know, they turned around messaging me, and I still have those messages saying, you know, you should think about your mom. There's no point. You've got a target on your back now. Why did you do this? So they're really trying to suss out whether it was me that leaked that info. But the problem was that Wirecard had leaked the info themselves once the investigation was going on. So Edo and everybody knew about it right away once the board found out. So it was very hard in that sense to pinpoint who was the troublemaker who leaked these things. So yeah, I just kind of ignored those messages and said, look, I'm just trying to find another job, just leave me alone, right? Because if you think about how everything transpired from January 2019, which now I recall the first FT article came out, it's quite like a spike. So you had the FT's first 3 articles have a lot of impact on the share price. That triggered the Singapore white collar crimes police to raid the whole office. But yet, all the way from the first article till the end, pretty much you had German law enforcement and regulators protecting the company by, in many instances, saying that this is an Asia problem, which is a very, very unusual approach for any regulator or law enforcement agency to take. You know, what you would expect is that these agencies would say, look, we understand certain allegations have been made. We are looking to it. Until then, we have no comment. But yet from the very first FT article, you have the people at BaFin saying, no, this is a short selling attempt, and all that kind of nonsense. I mean, you had FT journalists being investigated. So what I had to do was a very long track, right? It was 1.5 years before the company had to crash. So once the FT started having less impact, I realized that the only way to change the sentiment is from within Germany, because a lot of the German retail investors were viewing this as a Anglo-Saxon kind of thing. It was Brexit at the same time, right? There were still those sentiments. People were viewing it as though, like, okay, you've got this UK FT paper. They're jealous with our fintech darling of Germany, the only one we have pretty much at the time on that kind of valuation. And so this is just like a UK versus Germany thing. And Wirecard was super sophisticated in terms of having thousands of bots and Twitter armies. Every time someone would say something negative about them on Twitter, these new profiles will be created, destroying them. Forums would be attacking these individuals. So I also had to go on Twitter, which a few people know, and try to change the sentiment from there. Because what the FT and what the German press couldn't publish for legal reasons, I could under the anonymous name, the anonymous handle that I had on Twitter. So it was a very long 1.5-year effort, which is super complex actually. And even the movie doesn't encapsulate that, sadly, in order to make this company face the insolvency event, and the investigations which they're undergoing as of today.
That was quite surprising to me as well when looking into the allegations that were around, and a lot of bad news were kind of uncovered also in the past, and maybe even before the whistleblowing case as well. But Wirecard somehow managed to get out all the time, and the stock price kept increasing, though there were serious allegations in the room. So that must have driven you crazy as well, I guess.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating, but I think, again, like as I said, like once there's a goal to be achieved, it's just gonna keep on happening until I see it happen, right? I wasn't that fixated on it at some point. I mean, once the FT articles came out, once the Süddeutsche Zeitung articles came out, naturally things just took a turn on their own. They had a life of their own. You got hedge funds getting involved. You had TCI, the biggest hedge fund in Europe at that time. I think it still is, that also filed a criminal complaint. A lot of things were actually happening. KPMG was also forced through. You had the supervisory board change some of its members. So things were actually gaining momentum. All I had to do was just make sure that they were being channeled in the right way, and people were looking at the right things. One of the most shocking things to me was that KPMG, despite doing that special investigation, never reached out to me or any of the people who actually spoke to the FT. So I was also wondering how effective this is going to be type audit. So yeah, so there are a lot of real questions being asked. And of course, we talk about EY and the role of auditors in this whole thing. To me, it was completely shameful. A lot of people rely on audited financial statements of the Big Four in order to stamp some form of legitimacy of what a company is doing. But here we have just such a, I don't even know, I mean, I don't even want to use the wrong terms to describe it, but you have a Big Four accounting firm for 10 years saying there's nothing going on, everything's okay.
Yeah, it is truly just a surprising story that really, is like eye-opening that these things can happen at such a large scale. So, but finally you managed the breakdown of Wirecard. And, before going to the questions of the audience, just a final question to you. What is the biggest disappointment, Pav, to you in the entire story?
I think the biggest disappointment is the role of the way the law enforcement and regulatory agencies behaved in Germany. I think as a country that portrays itself to be the leader of the EU, the way those agencies behaved was just not what you would expect any of them to have done. And I think even as of today, what's also disappointing is the fact that so many things could have been done in order to prevent people from escaping, like Jan Marsalek, and none of these things actually happened. Like it was just full like there's just no way to describe it. Like it's just a shock.
Okay, thanks for letting us know about your story, which is truly unbelievable. Every time when you go through that, that's really like unbelievable. So I would pass over the word to my colleagues in order to raise the respective questions that came in.
Yeah, maybe before we jump into the Q&As, just a couple of follow-up questions. With regards to the topic of whistleblowing and what regulatory framework is actually there with regards to whistleblowing. We see now there's an EU directive, countries are obliged to implement whistleblowing framework within actually the next couple of weeks. Looking back to that captivating story of yours, would you believe that things would have turned out differently back in the days if something like that had been in place back then?
I don't know, because if you're talking about regulatory bodies, these might be the same bodies that put in place these directives. But if they just don't want to look at it, then there's no point having these directives in place.
Mm-hmm. And with all what that you've learned, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things, missing checks and balances, etc. But with all that you've learned the last couple of years, what would you consider typical red flags in fraud schemes like Wirecard?
I think red flags would be if your products are not adding up in terms of, for example, tech or competitiveness with a lot of your competitors a lot of your other companies out there. If your financial statements of your subsidiaries are constantly loss-making, you're always filing your financials late, you're spending months, sometimes even a year, arguing with auditors. You're hiring very inexperienced people in senior roles. And I think at the end of the day, it's really your sixth sense, right? Like people always play it down, but if something doesn't smell right, I think often either you choose not to want to look at it, but if you do, you realize you would see things that you may not want to see. And then it's just up to you. Do you get out of that situation or do you dig deeper?
So would that be your advice to anybody that maybe is on the call today? Maybe they're facing similar challenges like you did. Would that be your advice? Follow your sixth sense, your internal moral compass, as you've put it earlier?
Yeah, I mean, that's just the problem with these things is there's no way to, it's so case by case, because it also depends on the companies that you're working for, right? Like if you have like Wirecard was run like a family business, even though it was a DAX company. You had those same board members, other than the CFO who changed in the last 1 year, and Susanna Steidel was promoted for diversity reasons, from what I understand. If you have like a very powerful old school core running the company, and the company you suspect is doing all kinds of wrongdoings, then you need to be wise enough to know that if you're going to raise these things, it will go up to the same people who are running this whole place, right? But if you're talking about a company which is very, for example, diverse, and the power is spread between various departments in a very balanced way, then yeah, maybe your compliance programs or whistleblowing programs would have some effect. And oftentimes, I think the difficulty which whistleblowers face is a very personal one, which is they don't know if they're overthinking something, or is there really something to it? And again, they don't know who to speak to, right? Which is why I've advocated, as of the last few months, that governments actually create autonomous agencies, which would act as counseling bodies to these whistleblowers, on a purely confidential basis, because sometimes you just need to talk to someone on a, there's no incriminatory kind of setback. It's just speaking to someone saying, this is what I suspect. Am I on the right track, or am I overthinking things? If I'm on the right track, then please guide me as to what to do next. Because it's so complicated. Like, you don't even know who to trust within the company, including compliance people sometimes.
Absolutely. Wrapping everything up, there's lots of focus now on whistleblowing, of course. There's lots of focus on, getting green, ESG. What's your personal take on operating an ethical business versus shareholder value and profit maximization? Your own personal view on that.
I think there are just two ways to look at it. One is, if you want to do a get-rich-quick scheme and you want to do a fast sale, a fast exit, maybe you do a lot of shortcuts and take slightly more questionable routes to it. But if you really want to, as a shareholder, as a founder, you want to have a long, sustainable business, and you really genuinely want to put compliance or legal aspects at the forefront of what you're doing, because you may think that, so this is a problem, for example, in the crypto space, right? You have companies which say, look, investing in compliance structures and technologies is just increasing our cost factor. So you can say, fine, we disregard that. But what would then happen is, at any time, there might be a regulatory sanction, which would end up being more damaging than if you had invested those same amounts into your compliance structure. So what do you want to, everybody needs to ask themselves, shareholders, founders, staff, whoever, do you want to run a company where you can sleep peacefully at night, knowing that you may have spent a bit more money, for that security? Or do you want to take the riskier approach and then also face riskier consequences?
Fantastic. Thanks. I think that's a good way of wrapping everything up. Romana, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. May I hand over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Pav, we have some questions for you. The first ones are, what are some examples of the dubious practices? And next one is, what is the criminal energy? Was the criminal energy there from the very beginning, or did it come over time?
Okay, so in terms of dubious practices, you had invoices which were exactly the same as Wirecard invoices from companies which Wirecard had no reason to do business with. You had a company, for example, called Matrimonial Global, which you couldn't even Google, and the 1-2 hits that appeared would say that it's a matchmaking kind of company. So why is a matchmaking dating company, which nobody has heard of, wanting to create a payment system for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of euros? So that's like an immediate red flag. If you have employees emailing themselves like logos of third parties, then that's also a red flag. So those were examples of the dubious practices, right? The most important dubious practice on a more realistic level was the fact that the finance department operated in a very flexible way. So if we needed to present finances to a regulator to get, for example, a license, the finance department was flexible enough to create a more positive outlook on how those numbers looked like, right? So that's another dubious practice, because it should be an objective exercise, not one where you can make a loss into a positive and submit that to a regulator. In terms of criminal energy, I think, suspicions were there from the start, but and with, of course, some of the staff members talking, like Ido, talking about his direct criminal links via his in-laws. So that's a bit of an energy there. So these things just increased over time, obviously.
Okay, next question. What do you think the auditor was aware of incompetency of CFO? If EY realized the fact, why nothing happened?
Well, I can say, as a fact, having spoken to these guys, that they did question the experience of Ido there were serious questions, at least from the Singapore side, on Edo's experience levels. And I did document those and raise them. So, they did even make suggestions that maybe we need a more sound experience Edo type figure on the ground to deal with why there are significant delays for the last 5 years in submitting annual financial reports.
Mm-hmm. Were you afraid that they would directly trace the FT article back to you?
Yeah, there definitely was that fear. But I mean, I wouldn't even call it fear. There was that clear link because, in their mind, I was one of the people who had that info, right? But again, because they made the mistake of leaking it even to those who were suspected of these wrongdoings, there was just no 100% way to confirm who it was. In fact, I also found out from some of the journalists that who have now looked at all the information in the parliamentary inquiry, they did suspect someone else all the way, and they even engaged in intelligence, a company to engage in intelligence research on that person. And simply because that person had booked a flight ticket from Singapore to Europe to the UK during that timing, they were 100% convinced that it was that person, more than me, for example. And, that cost them 300,000 euros.
Are you and your mom in a protection program now, or can you live your life like before?
No. So the funniest thing is that no one in Germany has said a word of thanks other than, normal people like all of us reaching out on LinkedIn and on Twitter and stuff. German government has not said anything. I don't know. I doubt they're very happy with what happened, especially if you trace like a lot of these agencies being exposed in terms of competency in what happened. So it's kind of strange because on one hand, you have someone who helped a country expose the biggest financial scandal in their modern history. You would expect that to be some form of a thank you, at least. On the other hand, if there's none, then you question whether you are actually viewed as having done the right thing for them, or you're just viewed also like Wirecard viewed you as a troublemaker, because now everyone's like running around dealing with this thing. Singapore hasn't said a word either, so it's unprotected in Europe, unprotected in Singapore. Currently, I'm in Bangkok, which of course there's no protections either.
Okay. How do you consider to be promoted within the organization an efficient whistleblowing channel in order to convince the staff members as well as the senior management that the whistleblowing is an efficient tool and not only a decorative or complicated way to raise a very sensitive issue? Worth to mention that compliance officers are very often facing the reluctancy of staff to use such a channel.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is if you want to whistleblow, then what whistleblowers would want to be ensured of is anonymity, right? Because they don't want any backlash on what's happened, whether it's losing your job or anything else. For example, it could simply be defamation as well. So I think from what I understand, there's a lot of new technological products out there which are being offered to companies, which would guarantee that the anonymity of those channels would be maintained. And there's no way, for example, for a company to have rolled it out informally, which would then expose whoever sent that email. So yeah, I think if we do look into these kinds of updated modern technologies for whistleblowing programs, then they could potentially be effective. And finally, I think also mindset wise, right? We need to change the mindset that if you're exposing a fraudulent act or criminal activity, then that's not a bad thing. And I think a lot of countries need to get up to date with that kind of thinking. It shouldn't be viewed as like you're ratting on your company or you're biting the hand that feeds necessarily. So this is a very, these cultural shifts also take a while. But I think in the year 2021, And going to 2022 with all the movements that we see in the world, whether it's, you know, BLM movements or previously the Me Too movements, I think there is a trend towards people just having had enough of nonsense.
As we are running a little bit out of time, a funny question at the end. You have the signs of the Squid Game series on you. Is it on purpose?
Oh no, it's not on purpose. It's not meant to symbolize anything. It's just that I thought instead of wearing a boring shirt and jacket that I have done previously, I'll just try to modernize myself.
Okay, thank you, Pav. I will hand over to you, Patrick, though we have some questions left, but we are out of time now.
Yeah, it's always when things are exciting, and that was truly an exciting story, Pav. I mean, thank you for being with us today. It was incredible, and thank you also to the participants and our clients today in the session. If you have any further questions, please reach out to us even after the sessions. Have a great day, and if you attend any other session, many exciting insights. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.